Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, and welcome back to the second half of my chat with the amazing artist, P. Craig Russell, and the one, the only, the genre-defining author, Michael Moorcock. This is the second half of my conversation, and the gent's getting some really interesting stuff. Enjoy. Mike, how much oversight did you have while the book was being created?
None at all. And this is, sorry, I should say this, I should have said this to begin with. I really do, I've always, when I edited, with illustrations, covers, whatever it is, I pick the artist, that's it. The artist is then the person in charge. I've had pretty good luck with that too, apart from, the very early days when that didn't happen, when what's his name, the Irish guy, I can't remember his name, gave him a big pointy hat. But anyway, he apologized later. But he was a drunk, so he was always drunk, so you could never really.
It wasn't Barry Windsor Smith that gave him the pointed hat?
That was his idea. He got it wrong somewhere along the way. But I had a black Elric as well on another book, because they looked up albino and seen that albinism exists in a certain part of Africa, and so they made him black. Those are the early days with Lancer. Actually, those are sort of. I think Frazetta came along a bit later, but I did have some good artists, but they were it just didn't gel as well later on. But after the first few covers, I then Michael Whelan started doing the doors. That was an early job for him. He started there, and he did most of those covers, I think, not just the Elrics.
We're dovetailing quite nicely into something else that I wanted to ask, which was, and that was about the way you put the book together, actually, Craig. You were saying about how you worked in reverse, which I find fascinating, because I'd always wondered why the book was 7 issues rather than the more traditional miniseries, like sequential number, like whether it was 4 or whether it was 12. Yeah. And was it a case of you just took as many books as the story required?
At this point, I don't recall. I think I did a breakdown like in 1983 after I finished While the Gods Laugh. And I might have had it broken down into 10 issues and then different as an outline, but it came out to 7. That just seemed to be the number that needed to be done. And when I say I did it backwards, I didn't script it backwards. I scripted the entire thing and laid all 180-some pages out from pretty much beginning to end. But then when it came down to drawing, to doing the physical artwork, I did that backwards. I didn't write it backwards.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about too, because I've just finished an Elric novel, the last one, and they're sort of difficult to bring to a climax, as it were, within the novel, because the climax of the whole thing is sort of can overshadow it. So I thought the best thing, I better write the end first. And I wrote the kind of slam bang kind of spectacular everything, all the fireworks first, or not first, but early on, so that I still had the energy to produce it. I mean, I'm 81. I have to think in terms of these things these days. I'm only working on 2 books at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's already occurring to me too. I turned 70 this year, but I frequently do something very similar. I usually sort of start at the beginning, but once I sort of get going and I feel the energy, I will do the last few pages while I'm hot. So I know if I flag somewhere, it's not going to be at the ending where it couldn't be more deadly flagging. It'll be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
good.
That makes sense. Now I have a final question about this beautiful adaptation of Stormbringer, which is from our senior creative editor David Leitch, who's the guy who assembled the project internally at Titan, and he wanted to ask both of you how it felt to tell this final story of Elric, and that for you, Mike, whether there was a sense of sadness when you wrote the final outcome of Elric's life, and for you, Craig, when you illustrated, or in David's words, was there any sense of bloody hell, thank God that's over?
Well, there's always a great sense of relief when you realize you finished it, that it's here, because until then it's like the grain of sand in an oyster. It's just itchy, and you find yourself really clawing your way to the end or racing towards the end. And I tend to work harder and harder and longer hours as I get close to the end of a project, and then it's a great sense of relief. But it's the culmination of Elric and Stormbringer triumphant and all of that. You don't get the same sense in doing it as you do in reading it for the first time, because you're following the story through to the end and you're experiencing the emotions and dynamism and everything of the story as you're supposed to. When you're drawing it, like I say, I would have done, those were the first drawings I did. So I wasn't emotionally experiencing it. I was simply doing the pictures. I emotionally experienced it when I script it and lay it out. And I sort of, solve the puzzle of how you're getting from here to there and how it lays out on the page. And then I'm very emotionally involved in it, feeling the emotions. And you have to feel the emotions when you're drawing the characters in extremis as you're doing it. It's not a cool, objective thing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. How about yourself, Mike?
Well, it's a strange thing, because when Elric was dying, so was the magazine. It was the last issue of science fantasy, or seemed to be the last issue. It wasn't the last issue, as we know. It went on for some years after that. But Ted Carnell, who was the editor, was giving it up, and so he said, last issue, so that's it, sort of thing. And I said, I wrote an editorial in New World saying how terrible it was, these magazines were closing and all that. So it was all mixed up with the ending of what appeared to be the ending of science fantasy. Certainly, the new editor hated anything to do with sword and sorcery or anything like that. So I never would have done another Elric story for him. So I thought the whole thing was finishing, the whole thing. So it wasn't just that I was kind of involved in Elric's grand sacrifice. I was also, thinking of the end of the magazine. It was the end of everything in a sense. I mean, I wasn't that doomy. I mean, I had lots of other things I was doing and had to do. I was still writing comics, actually, for Fleetway. I suppose there was, but it's very hard to determine which emotion fitted where. I was sorry that Ted was stopping as an editor. I mean, he'd been a very good editor for me and many others. So that was it. It was an overall thing. I honestly felt that was the end of it. In those days, there was no market for fantasy at all. There was Lord of the Rings, Gormenghast in England. There was Howard in America, and Jack Vance's Dying Earth. One or two other kind of classics around, but there wasn't a genre at all. In fact, they wouldn't put fantasy on it because on a book, because fantasy meant children's literature. It specifically meant children's literature, even more than science fiction actually meant it in certain codings when books, publishers were selling the books. So there wasn't, I didn't expect it to go anywhere. I didn't expect a book version. I would have liked a book version. I remember thinking I'd like a book version. And when I did get a book version, I had to cut it by 25% because Jenkins sold into libraries and they only had a certain length of books that they did. So it's very good, but we're afraid you'd have to take 25% of it out. So I did. And the full version wasn't published until the Door version, I think, probably, when I had the chance to do it, because I knew Don Walheim well, and Don was a great editor. He's been sort of forgotten in the history of fantasy, but he and Larry Shaw and another guy called Sam Moskowitz, they were incredible enthusiasts, and they knew this stuff inside out. I mean, they were not illiterate people. They weren't just following, as it were, a kind of gosh, wow, enjoyment of a certain thing. They really had taste. And so they were republishing everything they could find. There wasn't very much. There was The Dying Earth, and there was Howard, and there was Leiber, but there was very, very little stuff around. So I didn't expect really anything much of this, except, for the audience of the magazines. Anyway, that was really
and lo and behold, he's Elric's taken on a life of his own. He's his own sort of absolutely continuing sphere of entertainment. I mean, when we've talked at length about this in the past, actually, Mike, but that must be so gratifying that he's actually become a self-sustaining narrative almost.
I don't know. I see sort of career stuff. I don't know about you, Craig, but I see sort of career stuff as sort of almost separate from me, something that's happening, but not absolutely, I'm not completely involved in it. Does that make any kind of sense?
Well, I haven't generated original characters like you have, so I don't think I've generated something that takes a life.
Yeah.
Is there fan fiction, Elric fan fiction?
I think there is. I don't think I'd read it. There've been a couple of anthologies published in the past. White Wolf, when they did a series of almost all my fantasy books, and it was in there, but I don't remember.
I'm just thinking, Annie Proulx's Brokeback Mountain, of all things, has generated a whole fan fiction of
sure, yeah,
of Ennis and Jack and their further adventures. And she's not happy
about
it.
They do that. And of course, I get it with Jerry Cornelius, but then I put Jerry Cornelius into the public forum, as it were. So that was a sort of deliberate experiment more than just people thinking, oh, I like that, I'll do one, or whatever they do.
That's probably the perfect segue into us wrapping up, because I'd quite like to have a whole separate conversation about the Cornelius books at some point if you're up for it, mate.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that. But on this note, I'd just like to say to both of you,
I'd like to say one thing.
Yeah.
And this might not even be important to the interview at all, but it was right after Stormbringer that I was sent Neil Gaiman's short story. He faxed it to me, One Life Furnished in Early Moorcock.
Absolutely.
And with the idea of my adapting that, and it was published in the first volume of Stormbringer. And it's Neil's autobiographical story of being 12 years old and being obsessed with Michael Moorcock, and especially the Elric stories. And they were coming out like once a month, or every few weeks there'd be a new Michael Moorcock book. And that was just the whole story of his childhood and youth, and how one author influenced and had such an impact on his life. And of course, he sent it to me as if you just might want to read this. And of course, I said right away, well, this would be perfect. Let me do this. And I didn't realize I was the fish on the hook. That's exactly what he intended me to do when he sent it to me. And I was happy to do it. It was fun.
Oh, man, what a wonderful outcome. And it must have been great for you to read that, Mike.
Oh, yes, it was. I mean, I remember when Neil came to see me first. He was a kid. He came with a friend of his. And I think probably, the way we all did, really, when we went to see somebody, we'd bring along a mate, so give you a bit of extra courage. And he was I really liked him. I mean, he was a bright, likable lad, and I'm so pleased that he's done so well. It's just great to see that, because he was always a nice bloke. I think that's probably all I judge people by in the end. At least that's the only ones I celebrate.
And to that I say, hear. Those are fine words to close out on. Okay, so this has been Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I've been privileged to talk about the legendary warrior Elric of Melniboné in his final tale, Stormbringer, with the legendary artist P. Craig Russell and the legendary author Michael Moorcock. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode, gents. It's been wonderful talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. It's great seeing you, and very nice talking.
Likewise. Nice talking to you too, Mike. Take care.
And
See you
everyone
again.
watching this, order your copies of Stormbringer from the links attached to the interview. Thanks, guys. Take care. All the
Thanks a
best.
lot. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.